Hello, everyone. This is Jonathan Weedman with Community Conversations presented by the Outlook Newspaper Group. And it's my great pleasure today to welcome really what I would call a treasure of Los Angeles, one of our great civic leaders, one of our great elected officials, one of our great community leaders, Jan Perry, former Los Angeles City Council member. And thank you, Jan, for being with us today. It's great to see you.
It's always good to see you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So let me ask you, let's start at the beginning. I think we've known each other now for over 20 years, but tell us a little about Jan Perry. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? And what led you on this path to working in community and politics?
Well, I grew up in Ohio, and I left there more than 40 years ago. And I've been in Los Angeles ever since. I think one of the biggest influences in my life, now that I look back over where I am now, are my parents, because I remember being in the car. We, lived just east of Cleveland. And, I'd always ask them a million questions when I was in the car about why are people on the street? Why are people just sitting on the corner? Why don't they have anywhere to live? Are they okay? And, I was one of those children, where I probably wore my parents out. But my parents always took us to civil rights meetings, voter registration meetings. And, because I was a little kid, so I would sit there and kind of soak it all in. And then, the adults would say, well, would you go get some, get snacks and bring them, to the table. So, we always helped out. I had an older sister and I had a younger sister. And my grandmother and her sister were involved in our lives. My grandmother on my mother's side, they were both domestic workers, but they were domestic workers for families who were very wealthy, and they wore uniforms and hats and all that. And they were from the South, and they used to talk to my mother about me, that I was very outspoken because they were from the South, and they had a brother who had been lynched because that he was convicted. The crime was called reckless eyeballing.
My God.
Which was looking at a white woman in the South. And so they were concerned or intimidated by, family members or just Black people in general who were very outspoken. So I witnessed that in a very powerful way. And I still think about it even now, because I used to argue with my grandmother and my aunt and say, they'd say, well, these are my families, the people they work for. And I said, no, they're not your family members. You are enslaved by them. And it's very similar to that, except you get money for it. And they would always get very angry about that. But I persisted.
And so perceptive of you, Jan, and certainly at a time, we're of a vintage where we remember the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Yes.
And the unrest, the civil unrest that occurred nationwide. I think younger folks don't know about that, certainly don't remember it. And it was against that backdrop.
Yeah, well, my father was a World War II veteran, and he was very proud, strong. My mother was very strong too in her own right. Strong Black man who fought in a segregated army and was still very patriotic. And I never saw him break down. I never saw him cry until Martin Luther King was assassinated.
Yeah.
And I remember him leaning forward on the counter in our kitchen with his face close to that black and white TV and, hearing the announcement. And I saw his shoulders just slump and his head go down. And he cried.
Yeah.
Because, it was devastating. But I also remember feeling scared because if my father was crying, my parents were obviously feeling vulnerable, and how could they protect us?
Right.
And then, we watched as cities went up in flames because of people's devastation and being just crushed by the weight of his murder, his assassination.
I have a conscious recollection of the event. I was 9 years old at the time, and I scarcely can't look at photographs, talk about it without feeling emotional because of the incalculable loss.
Yeah.
And it was one of those pivotal seminal moments, I think, in all of our lives, all caring, thinking people.
Right.
And obviously, learning this background, it's extraordinary, Jan. This is, I'm sure, in no small part what guided and drove you to become involved in community and in elected office, try and make a difference. You were elected to the LA City Council of, a city that ranks per capita, the sixth largest state in the union. And running for political office is so difficult to begin with, and all the politics and personalities. What led you to that decision, and what was that like?
I can tell you, I had 3 senior Black women from the community. I'd been the chief of staff, in that district that I ran in and was eventually elected. Term limits kicked in the previous administration, I think under Mayor Reardon, and then my boss at the time termed out. And so there were 3 women. There was Helen Johnson, who lived in Vermont Square. There was Mother Mary Knowles, who lived at 60th and Figueroa. And then there was Juanita Tate. And Juanita was the head of a nonprofit that still exists to this day and had its roots in the environmental justice movement. And they all said, look, you're helping people, you're solving problems. The seat is open because of term limits. Why don't you run? So I did. And I actually walked all over the district, talked to people. I speak Spanish. So I was able to speak to everyone. And I think people were stunned that I actually walked. I remember one lady, I met her at the door and she said, oh, you're not Jan Perry. And I said, well, I am Jan Perry. She said, oh, no, that girl's pretty. And I said, okay, well, I've been out in the sun all day and I have a hat on, but here, and I lifted my hat a little bit. And I said, these are my eyes. And I held my picture up and I said, see, same person. And, I just kind of laughed it off because I thought it was funny, but they hadn't had anybody walk in many, 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 many years. And so it was important, and it helped me establish an even more personal connection. I think that I was always trying to find that place in people's lives that went beyond just, oh, hey, I'm the councilwoman, what do you need? It was a personal thing. I got involved in people's lives. I spoke to a young man just the other day, met him at a block club meeting when he was probably a teenager, and now he's in his late 30s. And his block club president said, why don't you hire this kid and hire his sister? And I did. And, they both have gone on to get further education. He actually has earned a master's degree, married, kids, buying a home, all those things.
Wonderful.
So, I got involved in people's lives.
It's such important work, and it's hands-on work, and I think it's what's really needed today, Jan. This is just wonderful stuff you're sharing. I'm so excited because you filed to run for the 37th Congressional District seat.
Yeah. And
I'm going to be completely unbiased. I don't care what they say. I certainly hope you win, because you would be an awesome member of Congress, Jan. And you're what the nation needs right now. Some serious thinking and some talent and some skills and some ability. So let me ask you this. As someone who's worked in the community for so many years, who has such a long view and perspective, what do you feel are the urgent issues and priorities facing our community right now? I think our nation is at a crossroads. The tragedy of the George Floyd murder and the division and corruption of the last administration has created so many challenges. Certainly none that I've ever seen before in my 62 years. So what do you think are the urgent issues? And are you optimistic, or do we have more tough road ahead?
I'm optimistic, but let me get back to that. And I think we do have more tough road ahead. I think the issues are protection of our voting rights, protection of the right for a woman to choose what she wants to do with her own body. The cost of living is, again, spiraling in a very negative way. The cost to live in California is growing. To treat homelessness with greater urgency and less theory is the issue that weighs heavily on me every day and every night, because I represented Skid Row for 12 years and I know what it means to be able to save people's lives and to not treat it as a dissertation or a research project, because people's actual lives are being lost. Whether it's in truth or in theory, they are being lost. And I think just in general, simplifying or removing the trauma or reducing the trauma from people's lives. And I think about all these young people and children who have basically had to learn virtually during the lockdown and COVID, and you see an increase in the numbers of suicides and the health and wellness issues, the mental health issues that are going to come from this. We do have a recovery ahead of us, and we need to acknowledge it. We need to focus resources towards uplifting it as opposed to just talking about it. And it's for that reason and many others that I decided, after I saw the maps at the end of the redistricting process, to file to run for the 37th Congressional District, because it's an open seat.
Well, and leaders in Washington have, I think, been at such opposite ends in the last 4 years. Going to Washington, D.C., one of the things you'll need to do is work with your colleagues and figure out a way to try and tamp down or work with the other party, because there's such rancor, there's such insanity from some of them that it's shocking. It's shocking to all right-thinking people. So I can imagine what a challenge that's going to be.
Yeah, well, you know what? Coming from where I came from and growing up the way I did, I mean, there's a couple of postscripts that I'll throw out for you to consider. So my father was a GI, and he had the GI Bill, and so he wanted to buy a house in a small municipality just east of Cleveland, and they were not able to do that because they were Black. So they found a man who was Black, but he looked white, and he went and bought 4 separate parcels and resold them to my family and 3 other Black families.
Wow.
And that's how they got into that area. So, aside from the fact that, I got bullied, basically, they didn't call it bullying then, but that people called me, the N-word constantly, when we were in school, and my parents were always up there, trying to stop people. And, I remember my guidance counselor, he said to me, well, why don't you study cosmetology? And that's fine. And it's a good profession. But there was never a time when anybody, at least in his position, encouraged me to go to college.
Wow.
So when you talk about Washington, D.C. and how difficult it is, I've had a lifetime of dealing with people who are racist, quite frankly. And, I think that I have not a unique experience, but I have a very strong ability to deal with that issue and to confront it and still move forward.
Well, it has certainly been since the George Floyd murder, and I think it has ripped the Band-Aid off as never before, certainly in my lifetime, around this issue. And I think the great majority of Americans have had it with racism. Enough already.
We can see how destructive it is.
Oh, it's
because of technology. Of technology. That's the difference, because we didn't have that technology before. We had to rely on news reports. Now, when I was a teenager, I saw my father get pulled out of his car and put on the hood of the car. And I just, wanted to jump out and tell the police off, leave my father alone. Don't you know who he is? And he yelled at me and made me get back in the car.
Yeah.
Now I realize that he was trying to protect me.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, this is a time of reckoning in our nation, and I think
right.
we need leaders who go to Washington, who can be involved in the community, who can really start to move the needle on this thing meaningfully and substantively. So
Mhm.
I'm excited about your candidacy.
Thank
I
you.
I really am, and I think a lot of people will be and are, and we certainly wish you all the best.
Thank you.
I of course create this uh, conversation
Mhm.
to talk to leaders who have real experience and perspective.
Mhm.
And with everything that's gone on in our nation in the last couple of years, and in particular around the pandemic, which upended the nonprofit community, which upended all of our lives, and most especially harmed significantly our most vulnerable.
Mhm.
Um, what advice, direction, or guidance or encouragement would you provide to community leaders right now who are struggling to get through this, to deal with all the things that are confronting our world these days? Um, and with a pandemic that seems to come and go and continue to be rearing its head, and you mentioned recovery, you mentioned healing. We have a
Mhm.
long way to go. So what would you impart to them?
Okay, so one of the things that I learned, and it sort of exploded during the lockdown, the pandemic, we have to coalesce. We have to talk to each other even more. Not necessarily people of like minds, but you got to talk across the spectrum. And Zoom has made that easier for us. I joined so many more groups during the lockdown and have been communicating with people across the country, all over the country. I'm in a group called Black Women for Positive Change, and these women are all over the country. And we organize around social justice issues. We have a companion group called Good Brothers, and the men are in that group. We actually are multi-generational, multi-ethnic. The rabbi from the Tree of Life Synagogue is in our group in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Wow.
And we talk about issues. We really focus on de-escalation of violence and anti-violence issues and violence prevention. We focus on young people, and I can tell you that by talking to these women throughout the country, I have learned so much more about commonalities and people's approaches to dealing with issues. And the difference is the technology opportunity. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity that should be fully explored. So if you're a community leader, if you're a community-based organization, start building your network. Start by talking with the people you know. Just talk to them once or twice a week, something like that, just to say, hey, what's going on over on your block? You have a block club, you have a neighborhood council. What do you have? Are you involved in your faith-based organizations? If that is where your head is, and how many homeless people are in your area? Who are the social service providers? Ask them to come on your Zoom call so you can be more informed. I think the greatest thing, and if you look at young people, is that they can gather information faster
Mm.
because it's right there, and deploy it, mobilize it.
It's essentially, because that's the good side of technology, being able
Yeah.
to connect with people and these Zoom calls and the learning and the instantaneous of it. And then, of course, as you referenced earlier, there's the not so good side of technology, and that's when I wish we'd go back to our IBM Selectrics. But
Oh my God.
do you remember those? Some of you don't know what those are, but that was used to be an old electric typewriter, which was
Uh-huh.
the apotheosis of technology at one point.
Yes.
But I love it. So, Jan, you've had such a distinguished career,
Mhm.
and you've succeeded with uncommon success and consistently results. That, how do you do it? Where does that come from? Where does that drive come from?
Well, again, I watched my parents, and I also watched people once I got into the public sector. I remember a lot about Mayor Bradley, and one of the biggest things I remember about Mayor Bradley is that he left deliverables as part of his legacy that people could see, they could feel, they could touch. So for me, it was very important to build a lot of affordable housing so that people had somewhere to live, to build out the transportation system through South Los Angeles, the light rail on the Exposition line. And to move that forward, not only did it bring jobs into the community, but it's enabled people to travel east, west, and then these connectors north, south. And eventually when the regional connector is done, I've always hoped for a city where we could rely a lot less on cars and, to solve our transportation problems by, creation of light rail and things like that, as opposed to adding additional lanes on the San Diego freeway.
Right.
As soon as you add another lane, then it fills up. But, and with COVID now we have some new challenges, because now we have to make transportation safer so we don't transmit variants and the virus. And also it's a social justice issue.
Indeed.
To equalize or level the playing field so that more people of color can move around this city and have the freedom to be able to live where they want to live, because they can find affordability and to be able to work where they want to be able to work.
I just have to, you mentioned Mayor Bradley. I was a young banker starting out my career, and I once saw him driving.
Really, where?
Down 6th Street on his way to City Hall by himself.
Uh-huh.
And I was very concerned. So I wrote him a letter, and I said, "Dear Mr. Mayor, I'm your biggest fan, and I love your work and who you are and what you're doing, but I saw you driving by yourself. I don't think that's okay." And I sent the 2 weeks later, the phone rings in the branch, and somebody picks it up, and they said, "It's for you." I said, "Who is it?" They said, "It's Mayor Bradley." I went, "Oh, come on." And I got on the phone. I said, "Who is this?" And it was him. And he called me to talk to me about my letter. And he said not to worry, that he is careful and protected. And I said, "Mr. Mayor," I said, "no one's going to believe you called me. Could you send me your autograph?" And by golly, he said, "Well, now let me have your address. And what would you like me to say?" And he did. And he was one of the finest people this city has ever known. And I actually went to the memorial service. He was a hell of a guy. And
I have a story that can top that one. I worked in City Hall for a while, and one morning I went across the street to the little shopping area underneath the mall across the street from City Hall. I was on the escalator, and I heard all this chaos and people, "Hi, hello," and clapping and whatever. And it was like 8 a.m. I'm going down the escalator, and then I look to my left and I see Mayor Bradley coming up the escalator by himself. And I think they were Rite Aid bags in his hand, and he was going back up to go to City Hall. And, I was a lot younger than him, so all I could do is like stare. And then I started waving too, like, "Hi, Mayor, hi, Mayor." I was really kind of young.
I love it.
And he was an incredible figure, tall and very elegant looking.
Oh, yeah.
And he smiled and waved back. It was like, I basically wanted to just like faint.
He was the guy. And, he was, before term limits, he was elected a record 5 times as mayor.
Right.
He was the mayor that I grew up with. What wonderful stories. Well, now on that same note, I want to ask you about leadership, because I think it's sorely lacking in many parts of our world these days. I've had some great bosses in my career. Some have been just awful. So how would you describe your leadership style, and what do you, in your estimation, makes a great leader? What qualities?
I think some of the qualities that makes a great leader are the willingness to walk a path alone. If you have a deep, well-informed belief that what you're pursuing will ultimately benefit more people than they may even realize. Sometimes you have to want more for people than they actually want for themselves. And that can be a very, very, very lonely road sometimes. And when I think back about redistricting in 2012 and why I was fighting to keep downtown tied to South Los Angeles, it wasn't for me personally. What it was for the revenue that would flow from downtown south so that we could continue to do the work of, repairing the infrastructure, the work of building more affordable housing units, things like that. And, in many cases it fell on deaf ears, but I will say this, for all the yelling and hollering that I did back in 2012, I think this time around in redistricting, it actually went much better. And the political machinations were in large part removed from the process this time around.
Mm.
And so, I think that it was ultimately beneficial, but leadership can be lonely. But if you spend a lot of time informing your beliefs with life experience, with relationships, which I find to be very important to me in terms of how I develop my approaches to problem solving, then I think that you can do that walk and stay focused, stay on point. You will have to weather criticism. You will have to weather, it's politics, so people don't always play fair. But
Oh, that's for
for
sure.
me, yeah, I've kept a clear head, and I try not to let that affect me too much, even though I don't like it.
Yeah.
It does hurt my feelings sometimes, because sometimes I wonder, why are you doing this, or why are you blocking me, or why are you trying to knock me over, because I'm actually just trying to help more people. It's not about like currying favor or asking permission or being part of a political machine. For me, it's always been about doing the work.
I believe that. I know you, Jan, and I know that to be true. I've always been amazed at people who decide to go into the profession,
Mhm.
because it is so rigorous, it is so demanding, and especially today with social media and with just the way people go after one another.
Yeah.
It can be very painful. It can hurt, and it must require a focus and a dedication and just an ability to get through it. I got thin skin. When somebody's mean to me, I feel it, and I get upset and I yell about it. I
Mhm.
admit that. But elected officials have to stay focused on
Right.
getting the work done. And it's almost as you just got to bat off all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can wear you out, though. It can wear you out.
Yeah.
As much as I show a public face that seems to indicate that I have thick skin, and I probably have thicker skin than the average person, sometimes it gets to me.
Yeah.
And it's a drag on your spirit.
Well, I hope there's less of that than ever.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your parents, you
Mhm.
mentioned your sisters,
Yeah.
your aunt, you mentioned Juanita Tate, who I had the privilege of actually meeting and knowing
Yes. She was
many
something
years
else.
ago. But who are some of the other influences, people who've influenced your life? Now, these could be historic people, contemporary figures. Who would they be for Jan Perry? Who do you think about?
Well, I think about, historic figures, legacy figures, Dr. Maya Angelou, and I quote her a lot, and I remember her a lot. And, she always said, when people show you who they are the first time, believe them. I think about Harriet Tubman, who said, I could have freed more of you if you had known you were slaves.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think about that a lot. I think about Golda Meir, and that she used to have global leaders sit down and talk at her kitchen table. It's so charismatic and so engaging and so real and authentic. And I also want to say one other thing. I think a lot about people who I've pulled away from homelessness or helped them, and tried to track many outcomes of the individuals that I've had interactions with or discussions with. But I think about it every day, and the proliferation of encampments, and that they're not treated with the same urgency that you would treat someone that you love. And so those people influence me. And then I also remember, I could tell you almost all the victims during my tenure of violent crime,
Oh,
and people who were taken from their families by violence. That's why when I found Black Women for Positive Change, and I was able to dig deep and do a deep dive on violence prevention with this group from across the country, it was that balm that helped me refocus my energy in a positive way. But it definitely has had a great influence. And of course, my parents are at the top of that list. My mother and my father were both, elected public servants. And my mother was a social worker She was 19 when they got married. He was 26, just back from the war, like a lot of people in that generation.
Yeah.
And, they took on the world, and it was hard. And when I look back on what they accomplished, it's astonishing because they were so young.
Wow. Well, remarkable people. I am certain. So let me ask you a couple questions. What do you love about Los Angeles, and what does Jan Perry do for fun? What do you do to recharge your batteries? To working in the community is sort of its own reward, and we're like the shark that has to keep swimming to breathe. But what do you do to recreate, and what do you love about our city, Jan?
Well, I think what I love about Los Angeles is it has no limits. And as long as I've lived here, I'm still discovering new people, new communities, things that I've never seen before. And it just keeps unfolding. It's like this continuous unfolding drama. Sometimes you hate to love it, and sometimes you love to hate it, but
well said.
I'm in this for keeps, a relationship with Los Angeles. And it's complex, and the complexity is fascinating to me, endlessly fascinating. And then what I do for fun. So until my teacher had to go in another direction, I'm a ballroom dancer.
Awesome.
And my specialty is smooth dances. I want to get back to that. So if my teacher ever listens to this, he'll call me and we'll get back to lessons once a week. I love doing ballroom dancing because it will allow me to empty my mind and, sort of freely interact with someone else in a physicality that teaches you how to, actually, it's weird. Ballroom dancing can teach you how to listen to people better, because you have to pay attention to everything, including the way that they move, and be in partnership with them.
I love it. You're about the third or fourth friend of mine who I've discovered does and loves to do ballroom dancing. And of course, my husband Raimundo is a dancer, and boy, don't get between him and the front door when he's on his way to class. Oh yeah, he takes class at Colburn, and he's pretty good. Does he do bolero? I don't know. I'll have to ask him. I know he does ballet. I know he does modern dance. He just danced with a wonderful company at Red Cat several months ago. And but dance is in the family. I love it. Yeah. So that's wonderful. Well, as we start to wrap up, let me just ask you, Jen, is there anything else you'd like to share? Anything else you'd like to? I feel like we could talk for hours and talk for the rest of the day, but podcasts have their lifespan, and this has been such a great conversation. What else? Anything would you like to share with our listeners? I think I'd encourage people to reflect and try to crystallize the lessons that we've learned from this COVID, not only the lockdown, but the whole experience, because I think it's changed our behavior in a very dramatic way. Even in terms of shaking hands and touching people, or being in close proximity to them. And it's affected people a lot, I think, emotionally and psychologically. Just even in the workplace, because I work in an office 3 days a week, and, the employees have been out for a long time, and we're going to consolidate our operation to another location, but I don't know that they'll ever come back into the office on a regular basis. That's a radical change from the way that we worked growing up. Indeed. And so again, I guess, what did you learn from COVID, and how can we make it better? Well said. Well, Jan, I just can't thank you enough for joining us today. And I wish you all the best in your efforts and in your campaign. And I look forward to talking again real soon and getting updates and hearing how things are going. So, Jan, thank you so much for joining Community Conversations today. Thanks for having me. It's always good to talk to you. Indeed. Thank you, Jan.